July 12, 1998. The oppressive humidity of a Tennessee summer evening clung to everything, thick and unyielding, carrying the sharp, earthy scent of pine needles and damp soil. Deep within the Appalachian foothills, a faded, mud-splattered Ford Bronco groaned and rattled its way down a barely there dirt track, its headlights struggling to pierce the encroaching dusk. Inside, Tennessee Bureau of Investigation agent Mark Riley, his face etched with a mix of weariness and concern, squinted through the windshield, the static from his radio crackling like an agitated swarm of cicadas. Beside him, local sheriff deputy Sarah Jenkins gripped the steering wheel, her knuckles stark white against the worn plastic, her jaw tight. The dispatch had started vaguely, a runaway minor, then a welfare check, but the tone had shifted, growing urgent with each update. The journey felt endless. Each turned deeper into the wilderness. The air grew heavier, a palpable sense of isolation pressing in from the dense woods that crowded the narrow path. As Jenkins expertly navigated a particularly treacherous bend, the dilapidated outline of an unpainted shack suddenly materialized through the gloom, almost swallowed whole by the overgrown trees and tangled underbrush. A single, flickering bare bulb cast a sickly, jaundiced yellow glow from one grimy window, a stark contrast to the deepening twilight. Just outside, barely visible in the dim light, the skeletal silhouette of a dog, its ribs starkly defined, was tied to a weathered post, its mournful, almost human-like howl echoing through the oppressive silence, a sound that seemed to carry the weight of something ancient and broken. Riley and Jenkins exchanged a silent, uneasy glance. The dog's cries were not just sad, they were a chilling premonition. Then, on the warm breeze, a new sensation hit them, cutting through the damp earth and pine. It was a metallic, acrid smell, thick and nauseating, like something long dead, and then crudely burned, mingling with the musty odor of decay. It wasn't just neglect. This was a stench that spoke of profound suffering and something deeply wrong. The air crackled with unspoken dread, a silent alarm ringing in their minds. As they pulled to a stop, the engine cutting out and plunging the scene into an even more profound silence, a single, chilling question hung heavy in the air. A question that would soon haunt an entire nation. What unspeakable horrors lay hidden within the walls of Stump Ridge? Riley and Jenkins stepped out of the Bronco, the oppressive air immediately clinging to their uniforms, a heavy shroud of humidity and the sickening metallic odor that now dominated the night, a scent that hinted at unspeakable neglect. The dog's keening howl, closer now, seemed to vibrate in their chests, a mournful lament for a life of suffering, its skeletal frame barely visible in the dim light. The shack itself, a dilapidated, unpainted structure almost swallowed by the dense undergrowth, exuded an almost palpable sense of despair, its single, jaundiced light casting long, dancing shadows that seemed to writhe with unspoken secrets. As they approached the warped, rotting door, a hulking figure emerged from the gloom, filling the doorway with his imposing presence. It was Jedediah Stump, his frame broad and stooped, his face weathered and hardened by years of isolation, his deep-set, wary eyes immediately locking onto them. His presence was less an invitation and more a formidable barrier, a silent, unsettling challenge to their intrusion into his secluded domain, a clear signal that their visit was unwelcome and potentially fraught with peril. Jedediah Stump greeted them with a gruff, dismissive tone, his voice gravelly and laced with suspicion as he demanded their purpose. Riley, identifying himself as TBI, explained the welfare check, mentioning the concern for a potential runaway, while Jenkins scanned the immediate surroundings, her gaze lingering on the dilapidated porch and the grimy window. Through the half-open door, a glimpse of the interior confirmed their worst fears: squalor, dim light, and a pervasive, musty odor. In the shadows, they could discern several women, their faces pale and withdrawn, and then the children, Small, silent figures, their eyes wide with fear, some exhibiting noticeable physical deformities, strangely shaped heads, uneven limbs, a telltale pallor that spoke of poor nutrition and lack of sunlight. The scene was a stark, immediate contradiction to any notion of a normal, healthy family unit, sending a jolt of alarm through both officers, confirming their deepest anxieties. Jedediah quickly grew agitated, his initial dismissiveness hardening into outright hostility. "Here's my land, my family," he declared, planting his feet firmly, invoking a twisted sense of privacy and local autonomy that often shielded rural communities from external scrutiny. "Y'all got no right coming onto my property, asking questions." The conflict was immediate and palpable. The delicate balance between a citizen's Fourth Amendment rights against unreasonable search and seizure and the state's obligation to protect vulnerable individuals, especially children, from harm. Riley understood the legal tightrope they walked. Without clear probable cause, a forced entry could jeopardize any future prosecution. Yet the overwhelming evidence of neglect and the children's unnerving appearance screamed for intervention, a silent plea that transcended legal niceties, igniting a fierce determination within Jenkins to find a way past his defenses, realizing a direct confrontation without a warrant would be futile and potentially dangerous. Riley and Jenkins made the difficult decision to withdraw. But the images of the silent children, their hollow eyes, and the acrid stench of the shack were seared into their minds, fueling an urgent resolve that bordered on desperation. Back in the Bronco, the static on the radio seemed to mock their temporary retreat, a reminder of the isolation that allowed such horrors to fester. Jenkins immediately contacted her sheriff, while Riley called his TBI supervisor, outlining the disturbing observations and stressing the profound implications of Clara May's earlier, fragmented testimony. A young woman describing being kept by her uncle, a chilling detail that now resonated with horrifying clarity. This was no mere welfare check. This was a potential crime scene of unimaginable proportions, demanding immediate and coordinated action from both local law enforcement and the Tennessee Department of Children's Services. After their retreat, the Bronco became a mobile command center, buzzing with urgent calls. Agent Riley, fueled by a cold dread, relayed his observations and Clara May's fragmented account directly to his TBI supervisor in Nashville, the details painting a grim picture far beyond a simple welfare check. Deputy Jenkins, her voice tight with suppressed anger, spoke with Sheriff Brody, emphasizing the immediate danger to the children. The isolation of Stump Ridge, once a barrier, now served as a stark reminder of how deeply such abuses could fester unseen. The initial vagueness of Clara May's kept by her uncle phrase now resonated with horrifying clarity, hinting at generations of unspeakable acts. Their collective resolve hardened. This was not just a case, but a rescue mission demanding swift, decisive action from every level of law enforcement and child protection services. By dawn, a flurry of legal activity was underway. Riley, working remotely with the TBI legal team, drafted comprehensive affidavits for both search and arrest warrants. He meticulously detailed the physical evidence, the dog's neglect, the shack's squalor, the acrid smell, and combined it with the unsettling sight of the children's deformities and Clara May's harrowing, albeit brief, testimony. Jenkins provided crucial local context, bolstering the argument for immediate intervention. A local circuit court judge, roused from sleep, reviewed the compelling evidence, recognizing the grave risk to the minors. The warrants were signed, authorizing entry and the apprehension of Jedediah Stump, transforming the precarious welfare check into a full-scale criminal investigation. As the sun began its ascent, casting long shadows across the Appalachian foothills, a convoy of official vehicles wound its way back towards Stump Ridge. This time, the fated Bronco was joined by TBI SUVs, local sheriff's cruisers, and unmarked vans from the Department of Children's Services. The air, still heavy with humidity, now carried a different weight, the palpable tension of an impending raid. Forensic specialists, their kits meticulously organized, prepared for the grim task ahead. The sheer scale of the response underscored the gravity of the situation, a stark intrusion into a domain Jedediah Stump had long considered his own, shielded by remoteness and a twisted interpretation of privacy. This was the opening salvo in a battle for justice, and the quiet dignity of the law was about to confront the dark heart of a hidden kingdom. Upon arrival, Jedediah Stump emerged again, his hulking figure filling the doorway, but this time his defiance was met by an overwhelming show of force. The warrants were presented, cutting through his bluster. TBI agents, led by Riley, immediately secured the property, while DCS social workers, including David Chen, began the delicate process of approaching the women and children. Inside, the scene was even more disturbing than their initial glimpse suggested. A pervasive stench of urine and decay, makeshift bedding on the floor, and a profound lack of basic sanitation. Forensic teams, moving with methodical precision, began documenting every detail, their cameras flashing, each click capturing another piece of the horrifying puzzle that was the Stump homestead. The oppressive silence was broken only by the whispers of agents and the muted cries of frightened children. Clara Mae Stump, now safe and receiving initial medical attention, provided her full, harrowing testimony to TBI investigators. Her fragmented memories solidified into a coherent, albeit traumatic, narrative of Jedediah's absolute control, the incestuous relationships, and the pervasive neglect that defined their lives. Simultaneously, David Chen and his DCS team faced the daunting challenge of engaging with Eliza and Ruth, whose fear and profound conditioning made communication incredibly difficult. Their eyes, vacant and mistrustful, spoke volumes about their long-term suffering. Meanwhile, forensic specialists began collecting DNA samples from the residents and the property, meticulously gathering evidence that would later be cross-referenced with national databases, laying the groundwork for the genetic analysis that would expose the full extent of Jedediah's monstrous lineage. The immediate legal battle began even before Jedediah Stump was formally arraigned. His court-appointed public defender, a seasoned local attorney named Dale Miller, wasted no time filing a motion to suppress all evidence gathered during the initial raid, arguing the warrants were based on insufficient probable cause and that the officers had exceeded their authority. Miller contended that Clara Mae's fragmented testimony was unreliable, given her deeply traumatized mental state, and that the physical observations made by Riley and Jenkins, the dog's condition, the shack's squalor, the children's deformities, were subjective and not sufficient grounds for a forced entry onto private property without clear and present danger. This aggressive legal challenge, a common tactic in high-profile cases, immediately threatened to undermine the entire foundation of the state's burgeoning investigation, potentially invalidating crucial evidence and setting a dangerous precedent for future interventions. It forced the prosecution to immediately shift focus from gathering new evidence to vigorously defending their initial actions in court, consuming valuable time and resources. This legal maneuver by Miller wasn't just a procedural challenge. It was a direct assault on the credibility of the victims and the legitimacy of the state's intervention. The defense attorney shrewdly highlighted the isolation of the Stump family, subtly implying their unconventional lifestyle was being unfairly targeted by city folk, rather than being a clear-cut case of egregious abuse. Miller also began to sow seeds of doubt about the children's physical deformities and developmental delays, suggesting they were natural birth defects common in isolated communities with limited medical access, rather than undeniable evidence of multi-generational inbreeding and severe neglect. This narrative, crafted to appeal to local sentiments of self-reliance and suspicion of external authority, placed an immense burden on the prosecution, led by Assistant District Attorney Sarah Evans. She now had to not only prove Jedediah's guilt beyond a reasonable doubt, but also defend the very act of rescuing the victims, facing skepticism from parts of the community who harbored deep mistrust of outside interference. The defense's aggressive tactics sent immediate ripples through the TBI and DCS teams. Agent Riley and Deputy Jenkins felt the palpable weight of the scrutiny, knowing their initial judgments and the legal foundation for their intervention were now directly on trial. David Chen, the dedicated DCS social worker, found his already challenging efforts to build trust with Eliza and Ruth becoming even more precarious. The women, deeply conditioned by Jedediah's absolute control, heard whispers of Miller's arguments that they were being persecuted or misunderstood, and began to question if they were truly saved or merely pawns in an external power struggle. This insidious internal conflict, coupled with the external legal pressure and the threat of evidence suppression, threatened to re-traumatize the victims and complicate their already difficult journey towards recovery, transforming the fight for justice into a protracted and emotionally draining battle against both Jedediah's manipulation and the ingrained skepticism of the community. The TBI Crime Scene Unit, a team of seasoned forensic specialists, meticulously processed the Stump homestead in the days following Jedediah's arrest. Their findings painted a chilling picture of systemic neglect and squalor, far beyond what Riley and Jenkins had initially observed. Every surface was coated in grime. Makeshift sleeping arrangements fashioned from rags littered the floors, and the air was thick with the stench of human and animal waste. Detailed reports documented insufficient food storage, unsanitary water sources, and evidence of long-term malnutrition among the residents. This wasn't just poverty, it was a deliberate abandonment of basic human care, turning the dilapidated shack into a living testament to profound suffering and a direct refutation of Jedediah's claims of a self-sufficient family unit. The sheer volume of photographic and physical evidence created an irrefutable record of the horrific conditions. A critical breakthrough emerged from the genetic analysis conducted by the state's forensic lab. DNA samples collected from Jedediah, Clara May, Eliza, Ruth, and all the children revealed startling patterns of consanguinity. The results unequivocally confirmed multiple generations of inbreeding, directly linking Jedediah as the biological father to several of the children born to his niece wives, and establishing complex, twisted familial relationships that defied conventional understanding. This scientific evidence provided an incontrovertible answer to the children's pronounced physical deformities and developmental delays, dismantling the defense's argument that these were merely natural birth defects or the consequence of isolated living. The genetic markers became the silent, undeniable witnesses to Jedediah's monstrous legacy, solidifying the charges of incest and aggravated sexual battery. As Clara May continued her journey toward healing, working with therapists and Agent Riley, her fragmented memories began to coalesce, providing invaluable investigative leads. She recalled Jedediah's obsessive habit of documenting his family, often referring to an old, leather-bound ledger he kept hidden. TBI agents, acting on her detailed description, meticulously searched the property again, eventually discovering the crude family tree hidden beneath a loose floorboard in Jedediah's makeshift bedroom. This ledger, filled with Jedediah's spidery handwriting, chillingly mapped generations of incestuous pairings and births, serving as a grotesque testament to his absolute control and perverted sense of lineage. It was a self-incriminating document, a tangible piece of his twisted ideology, offering a direct, horrifying window into his hidden kingdom. Further corroboration came from an unexpected source, Dr. Evelyn Reed, the local general practitioner. Upon learning the full scope of the investigation, Dr. Reed, with proper legal consent, reviewed her limited medical files pertaining to the Stump family. Her records, spanning years, contained numerous notations of unusual developmental delays in the children, recurring skin conditions indicative of poor hygiene, and peculiar physical anomalies she had previously been unable to explain. Now armed with the TBI's findings and the genetic analysis, these disparate observations clicked into place, forming a coherent pattern of long-term neglect and inbreeding. Her professional testimony, detailing years of subtle, unaddressed medical issues, provided an objective, external validation of the horrifying conditions within the Stump household, further bolstering the prosecution's case. With each piece of evidence, the prosecution's case against Jedediah Stump grew stronger, effectively countering the defense's initial attempts to suppress evidence and discredit the victims. Assistant District Attorney Sarah Evans now possessed a formidable arsenal. The meticulous forensic reports detailing the squalor, the irrefutable genetic proof of incest, Clara May's increasingly coherent and damning testimony, and Dr. Reed's corroborating medical observations. This overwhelming body of evidence presented a united front, meticulously piecing together the grim reality of Stump Ridge. The legal battle was far from over, but the state was now firmly positioned to expose Jedediah's hidden kingdom, transforming the initial welfare check into a powerful testament to the relentless pursuit of justice for the most vulnerable. Despite the mounting evidence and the prosecution's growing confidence, a significant hurdle unexpectedly emerged that threatened to derail their momentum. Eliza Stump, one of Jedediah's niece wives, whose initial interviews had been fraught with palpable fear and confusion, began to recant key aspects of her earlier statements. Under the watchful eye of a court-appointed psychologist, and during a series of delicate recorded interviews, Eliza started to echo Jedediah's narrative. She framed her life at Stump Ridge not as captivity, but as a, quote, traditional family existence, describing Jedediah as a stern but ultimately loving patriarch. She claimed any discipline was deserved, and that the children's conditions were simply God's will. Her profound psychological conditioning, a lifetime of manipulation and isolation, was now manifesting as a distorted loyalty, casting doubt on her prior, fragmented accusations, and threatening to unravel the prosecution's carefully constructed case, particularly regarding the allegations of false imprisonment and non-consensual acts. This unexpected turn blindsided Assistant District Attorney Sarah Evans and the TBI team. Defense Attorney Dale Miller, ever opportunistic, immediately seized upon Eliza's revised testimony, presenting it as compelling evidence of the state's coercive tactics and the inherent unreliability of traumatized witnesses. He argued that Eliza, now speaking freely and without duress, confirmed Jedediah's claims of a consensual, albeit unconventional, family structure, directly undermining the grave charges of kidnapping and aggravated sexual battery. David Chen, the dedicated DCS social worker, was particularly devastated, having spent weeks painstakingly building a fragile rapport with Eliza. He understood the complex dynamics of long-term abuse and the victims' often conflicted tendency to defend their abusers, but seeing it weaponized in court was a bitter and frustrating blow. This development shifted the immediate focus from Jedediah's clear guilt to the victims' perceived credibility, forcing the prosecution to reevaluate their entire strategy and brace for a more arduous courtroom battle, potentially turning public opinion. Agent Riley and Deputy Jenkins, while deeply frustrated by Eliza's recantation, understood the profound psychological scars that led to her altered statements. They knew Jedediah's insidious influence ran far deeper than simple coercion. It was a lifetime of calculated indoctrination that warped reality for his victims. The prosecution's revised strategy now pivoted heavily on the irrefutable physical and genetic evidence, emphasizing the children's pronounced deformities as undeniable proof of multi-generational inbreeding, regardless of Eliza's shifting narrative. Clara May's testimony, now more crucial than ever, would need to be meticulously corroborated by the extensive forensic findings and Jedediah's own chilling ledger, which detailed his twisted family tree. This twist, while challenging, inadvertently strengthened the state's resolve, forcing them to present a case that transcended individual, potentially wavering testimonies, focusing instead on the overwhelming scientific and circumstantial weight that painted a clear picture of systematic abuse, regardless of a victim's ability to articulate their suffering. The story of Stump Ridge, initially a local tragedy, exploded onto the national stage. News fans from Nashville, Atlanta, and even New York descended upon the quiet Appalachian County seat, transforming its sleepy Main Street into a chaotic media circus. Helicopters buzzed overhead, their rotors echoing like a relentless drumbeat as reporters vied for sound bites from anyone connected to the case. The grotesque details of Jedediah's hidden kingdom, the inbreeding, the squalor, and the sheer number of victims became front-page news across the country. Talk shows debated the failures of social services and law enforcement, while columnists wrestled with the uncomfortable truths about poverty, isolation, and the dark corners of rural America. The town, once anonymous, was now under an unforgiving spotlight, its residents grappling with shock, shame, and a profound sense of betrayal, the world watching their every move. The media frenzy quickly polarized the community, fueling an already simmering tension. Outside the county courthouse, two distinct factions emerged, staging daily, often vocal, demonstrations. On one side, local women, many with children in tow, held signs demanding, quote, "Justice for the Stump children," and "Protect our kids," their faces etched with a mixture of anger and sorrow. They represented the growing outrage against Jedediah's horrific actions. Across the street, a smaller but equally fervent group of Jedediah sympathizers gathered, brandishing crude, hand-painted placards proclaiming, "Hands off our families," and "Jedediah is innocent." They echoed defense attorney Miller's narrative, portraying Jedediah as a victim of government overreach and a misunderstood patriarch upholding, quote, "traditional values," their shouts of support often clashing with the cries for justice, creating a volatile atmosphere that reflected the deep societal fault lines exposed by the case. The escalating public outcry intensified the pressure on Assistant District Attorney Sarah Evans and the entire investigative team. Every decision, every statement was scrutinized by both the media and a divided populace. Agent Riley and Deputy Jenkins, once hailed as heroes for their initial discovery, now faced accusations of overzealousness from Jedediah's dwindling but vocal supporters, while others demanded to know why Jedediah's atrocities had gone unnoticed for so long. David Chen, the DCS social worker, found his delicate work with the traumatized victims constantly interrupted by demands for updates and interviews, further complicating the already arduous process of healing. The team understood the weight of public expectation, knowing that a misstep could not only jeopardize the case against Jedediah, but also undermine public trust in the very institutions designed to protect the vulnerable, making their pursuit of justice an almost unbearable burden. As the trial date loomed, the dramatic escalation brought with it tangible threats. Anonymous calls and letters, filled with vitriol and veiled warnings, began to target the prosecution team, Agent Riley, and even the social workers involved. Security around the courthouse was significantly heightened, with additional sheriff's deputies and TBI agents patrolling the perimeter, their presence a stark reminder of the volatile emotions swirling around the case. Concerns for the safety of Clara May and the other victims, now housed in secure, undisclosed locations, intensified, requiring round-the-clock protection. The small town, once a symbol of rural tranquility, was now a powder keg of resentment and fear, irrevocably changed by the exposure of its darkest secret, forcing everyone involved to confront the grim reality that justice, in this case, would be fought for not just in court, but in the very fabric of their community. The air in the Blount County courtroom was thick, with a palpable, almost suffocating tension, every seat occupied, reporters jostling for a vantage point, the silence punctuated only by the hushed whispers of the gathered crowd. Jedediah Stump, surprisingly composed, sat impassively beside Dale Miller, his court-appointed public defender, presenting a facade of calm defiance. Then, Clara May Stump was called to the stand. She walked slowly, her eyes downcast, a figure of fragile resilience, yet with an undeniable strength radiating from her slight frame. Assistant District Attorney Sarah Evans began her questioning gently, guiding Clara May through the initial, less painful memories, allowing her to acclimate to the intimidating environment. Clara May's voice, initially a soft murmur, almost lost in the cavernous room, slowly started to recount the decades of isolation, the pervasive fear, and the grinding, daily realities of life at Stump Ridge, her words painting a stark, unsettling contrast to the sterile courtroom. As Sarah Evans meticulously presented photographic evidence detailing the shack's unimaginable squalor and the children's pronounced physical deformities, Clara May's voice gained a quiet, steely resolve. She spoke with heartbreaking clarity about Jedediah's twisted lessons, how he meticulously warped scripture and the concept of family loyalty into a perverse justification for his absolute control, for the incestuous relationships that had scarred generations. She described the constant, gnawing fear, the silent suffering endured by her children, and her own desperate, unspoken hope for their escape, a yearning that had smoldered within her for years. Jedediah, who had maintained a stoic, almost defiant expression throughout the trial, visibly flinched. His jaw tightened, his gaze flickered, and for the first time, his carefully constructed facade of a misunderstood, benevolent patriarch began to crack under the weight of her raw, unvarnished truth, exposing the monstrous reality beneath. Then, in a moment that sent a ripple of shocked gasps through the courtroom, Clara May reached into her pocket. With trembling hands that nonetheless conveyed an unwavering purpose, she produced a small, worn, leather-bound journal. "He called it his family book," she whispered, her voice now clear and strong, resonating with a newfound authority. "But I wrote in it too, when he wasn't looking." This journal, filled with her own meticulously documented dates and specific acts of abuse, became a direct, irrefutable contradiction to Jedediah's claims of consensual relationships and his self-portrayal as a stern but loving leader. Coupled with the stark medical evidence of the children's pronounced deformities and the incontrovertible genetic analysis confirming multi-generational inbreeding, Clara May's powerful testimony created an undeniable wave of revulsion and condemnation, not just among the jury, but even from the few remaining sympathizers in the public gallery, unequivocally sealing Jedediah Stump's fate. The jury's verdict was swift and unequivocal. Jedediah Stump, found guilty on all major counts including incest, aggravated sexual battery, and child abuse, faced the full force of Tennessee law. Judge Eleanor Vance handed down a sentence of multiple life terms without the possibility of parole, ensuring his perverse reign was permanently confined to a state penitentiary. For Clara May, Eliza, and Ruth, their freedom marked only the beginning of an arduous journey. Placed into intensive trauma therapy and rehabilitation programs, they slowly began to navigate a world alien to them, grappling with decades of psychological conditioning. The children, with their varying degrees of physical and developmental challenges, found solace in specialized foster care, each placement a fragile step towards a future free from the shadow of Stump Ridge. The harrowing revelations from Stump Ridge didn't just end with Jedediah's conviction, they reverberated across the nation, sparking a profound and often uncomfortable dialogue about the hidden America. News channels and public forums debated the systemic failures that allowed such atrocities to fester, drawing attention to the critical need for increased funding and resources for social services in underserved rural areas. The Blount County community, deeply scarred by the exposure of its darkest secret, grappled with a mixture of shame, anger, and a renewed commitment to vigilance. The case became a stark reminder of the delicate balance between individual privacy and the state's paramount duty to protect its most vulnerable citizens, especially children trapped in cycles of generational abuse. While the scars of Stump Ridge would undoubtedly remain, the story ultimately offered a testament to resilience and the unwavering pursuit of justice. The children, some eventually adopted into loving families, began to experience the simple joys of childhood, their futures no longer dictated by the twisted legacy of their birth. The dedicated efforts of Agent Riley, Deputy Jenkins, David Chen, and Dr. Reed, though emotionally taxing, had illuminated a dark corner of human suffering, ensuring no child would again fall prey to Jedediah Stump's hidden kingdom. Their fight was a beacon, reminding us all that the truth will eventually emerge, and justice, however slow, will prevail for the innocent. If this story resonated, like this video, subscribe for more in-depth true crime, and watch our next case. It's just as compelling.